Phil Ivey may be the best poker player of all time, crushing the toughest games in the world. His fearless and aggressive style proves you don't always need to have the best hand, you just need to convince your opponents that you do.
I had two aces with the ace of clubs.
Here with you. It's a good play.
Here are 6 top moments Phil Ivey bluffed his way to winning huge pots. Starting off at number 6, Phil shows us he can turn any 2 cards into a bluff. Longtime professional Barry Greenstein opens action with a raise to 5,500 with Queen 10 offsuit.
Barry's gonna step out here and raise to 5,500 with Queen 10 offsuit.
Phil Ivey feels Barry has been opening too many pots and decides to 3-bet him with one of the worst hands possible, 5-2 offsuit, raising it up to $18,000. Robel and Negreanu get out of the way, but Dutch professional Lex Veldhuis has King-Jack suited in position and tries to take down this pot pre-flop. He cold 4 bets to $51,600. A strong play. With a king in his hand, there's a lower chance Greenstein or Ivey can have a combination of ace-king or king-queen. And if he's wrong, he still has a chance to flop a good hand. Barry gets out of the way, but Phil Ivey feels like he knows what Lex is up to, deciding to fight fire with fire and shoves all in with 5-2.
I don't believe it. Phil Ivey just went all in with a 5-deuce offsuit.
A truly manic play, but the bluff gets through and Phil Ivey steals the pot.
Thought you were just angry at Barry.
I am.
Lex had the right read, but you have to commit if you want to outbluff Phil. At number 5, Phil Ivey faces off against Allan Cunningham. With a couple folds before him, Cunningham looks down at pocket aces from the cutoff position, making it 2,000 to play. Tom Dwan folds on the button, but Mike Mattisau likes his king 10 suited from the small blind and makes the call. With those odds, Phil Ivey could call here with almost any 2 cards, and he decides to do so with 10-5 of clubs on the big blind. The 3-way flop shows 9-9-6 with 2 diamonds. Mattisau checks, and Phil Ivey leads out immediately with a bet of $4,500 into 2 opponents. Cunningham, a little surprised by the action, takes a glance at Phil. With the best starting hand in the game, he's not going anywhere and decides to make the call. Mattisau doesn't like what's going on and gets out of the way. The pot now, $15,600, going heads up into the turn. The dealer brings a 4 of diamonds, completing the flush.
That's the 3rd diamond out there. Neither player with a diamond, but Cunningham doesn't know that.
Phil doesn't hesitate and decides to rep the flush, firing another large barrel of $12,000.
1,200 to bet.
Most players would only make this bluff if they held the ace of diamonds in their hand, blocking their opponent from having the best possible hand. But no fear, Phil decides to do it with complete air. Again, Cunningham can't go anywhere yet, questioning what hands could Ivey do this with before delicately picking up his chips and making another call. A 6 of spades on the river pairs the board again. Now, Cunningham may not believe Ivey bets the turn with just a 6. But when Phil fires a 3rd $30,000 shot,
I think you're probably right here. He's betting a 9, a flush, or nothing.
Yeah, I mean, when he bets 12,000 on the turn after Cunningham calls me, I've either got a 9 there or a flush. The 6 doesn't really change much.
you start to question things. The pot now sits at just under $70,000. Cunningham plays with his chips. Any 9, any 6, and any 2 diamonds now beat him. He's had the best hand this entire time, but Ivey has flipped the script on him. You can see the pain inflicted. Allan Cunningham wincing as he makes the fold. In poker, it's definitely hard to fold aces. Against Phil Ivey, he makes it hard to call. Number 4 is another night at the $1 Million Cash Game. Something about these star-studded cash games tends to bring out the best in Phil Ivey. Does he come in with something to prove, or is he just leaps and bounds ahead of his peers? Mike Mattisau opens the action, dealt pocket kings in the cutoff position. He makes it $4,700 to play. David Benjamin calls with his pocket 3s in position on the button, a good spot to try and hit a 3 on the flop. Phil Ivey on the big blind decides to flat call with his ace-4 of spades. Heading 3 ways to a flop, 4, 6, jack with 2 clubs. First to act, Ivey quickly checks. Action on Mattisau. A low connected board like this is ugly for his overpair, falling more into the range of the 2 callers. Mattisau decides a large bet of $11,000 should keep anyone from chasing the straight.
Exactly.
And his king of clubs makes him pretty comfortable with a flush. David Benjamin is spared for today, but remember his face. Phil will do a number on him later in the video. Ivey asks Mattisau to count his chips, usually a sign someone is about to bluff raise.
No roll. Like, what do you?
He does. He probably thinks that if he catches a 4,
But instead, just calling behind, perhaps planting a seed of doubt. The turn is a jack of clubs, completing the flush. Ivey checks, and Mike Mattisau checks quickly behind him.
well, he's gone check, check.
If he put Ivey on a jack, he is behind now. but has 9 clubs remaining in the deck. The river is a 7 of clubs, bringing 4 to a flush on the board and completing the second nut flush for Mattisau. Ivey checks again. With the action on him, Mike Mattisau makes a show of checking his cards before finally betting $15,000 into 37, less than half the pot.
Get a $15,000 bet from Mattisau.
Ivey was ready to give up the pot, but now he takes all this information in, every bet, every action, and believes he can get Mattisau off his hand, firing back with a huge raise of $52,000. Mike Mattisau has the king high flush, and Phil Ivey only has bottom pair, but Mike is the one sweating his decision, going deep into the tank, hoping to get some kind of read on Phil, but he gives him nothing. Mattisau needs another $37,000 to call, and he's trying to find a reason to, but he just can't find one and has to muck his hand.
And he
And he's
throws
laid
it
it
away.
down.
Oh my, he's going to be sick. And is Ivey going to show this?
Phil tells him he did have an ace, but not the ace. At least Mike takes it like a champ.
I had 2 aces with the ace of clubs.
Here with you. It's a good play. Whatever.
Number 3 has Phil Ivey schooling the young guns. Starting the action, we have a young Andrew Feldman. Feldman raises first in for $2,000 with King Queen of Diamonds. Phil Ivey notices he's been opening a lot of pots, and he's had enough of it. The old dog is ready to teach the kid a few lessons, and Queen 4 offsuit looks strong enough to do so, raising it up to $7,000, a 3.5x 3-bet. The hand folds back to Feldman, thinking for a moment before making the call. The flop comes down 5-5-10 with 2 clubs. Even though Feldman is actually way ahead with his 2 overcards, he's now in a tough position. Feldman has 3 things working against him. He's missed the board, he has to act first, out of position, into a 3-bet pot, and the person that 3-bet you is Phil Ivey. He takes his time and eventually checks. Phil is just getting started. His game plan from the start of this hand was to turn up the pressure, and that's exactly what he does, betting $11,000 into a $15,700 pot. That's a large sizing for a board like this. Feldman is well aware of Ivey's style and knows he likely hasn't connected with this board either. Not wanting to play scared, he actually raises the pot to $28,500, 2.5 times Ivey's bet.
Holy moly, I didn't see that coming.
Phil Ivey decides to just call, and Andrew Feldman is left a little confused by it. The turn brings an 8 of spades. Andrew doesn't improve at all, and the pot has gotten very large, sitting at $72,700. Andrew decides to just check, and here's the genius of Phil. Facing the re-raise on the flop, he could have just folded and let Andrew take the pot, catching him in his bluff. Instead, he decides to call, suspecting that Andrew may be bluffing himself. This put Andrew Feldman in a spot he may have never been before, making him uncomfortable to bluff again, while giving Phil another turn to watch Andrew's action and gain some information. If Andrew had bet, he could fold knowing he really had a strong hand, but when he checks, it's exactly what Phil had suspected, sizing down his bet to $27,000, about 1/3 of the pot, giving Feldman a good price. Phil's bluff now looks like he wants Feldman to call. Andrew Feldman makes the stomach-turning decision to fold and save the chips he has left. Phil didn't need to make this play. His Queen 4 could have been an easy fold, but he wanted to make a play, and Tom Dwan approves. At number 2, this Phil Ivey bluff leaves his opponent needing a therapist. No re-raises pre-flop as all 6 players decide to limp into the pot. Not something you see often in high-stakes poker, but hey, we're all friends here. King, King 2 on the flop, and here's where players stop being so friendly. Both Phil Ivey and Patrick Antonius have hit 3 kings. Antonius is well ahead with his jack kicker though. David Benjamin has a queen high flush draw. The action checks around to Antonius on the button, the last to act. He decides to bet $3,000 into a $5,000 pot. All the players with 0 equity fold out their hands with only David Benjamin and Phil Ivey making the call. Heading 3 ways to a turn, a 4 of diamonds completes the flush, putting Benjamin far ahead of his opponents. Now a 72% favorite. He likes his card almost as much as he likes his striped shirts. Being out of position and the first to act, Benjamin decides to check. Ivey checks right behind him, action back on Antonius, trying to get value from a weaker king or someone looking for a 4th diamond. Antonius bets $10,000, unaware that Benjamin has him dominated right now. In a limped pot, people can show up with all kinds of crazy hands. The way the board is run out, Patrick Antonius is likely regretting not raising his king-jack pre-flop. Benjamin doesn't take long to call. Ivey decides he's got enough equity to make the call as well. A 5 of diamonds brings 4 to a flush on the river, a truly ugly card for everyone. Certainly, David Benjamin would have been happy to lead out with a bet here had any non-diamond come down, but now he is forced to quietly check. Then from nowhere, Phil Ivey bets out $40,000, a massive near pot-sized bet, a huge sign of strength from the 3rd best hand at the table. A very smart bet from Phil, knowing one of his opponents likely has a better king, and the other a flush, albeit a weak one. Any ace X suited would likely raise pre-flop. As played, this is one of Phil Ivey's worst hands that could make it to the river, making it a perfect candidate to turn into a bluff. Antonius is in a tough spot, but with Benjamin left to act behind him, he makes the smart play and folds a strong king. But there is, and that's what makes this bluff from Phil Ivey Ivey so genius? David Benjamin stares at Phil for a while, hoping to get some kind of read, but Ivey gives him nothing, eventually making the fold. Patrick Antonius breaks the tension, admitting his mistake.
No, I made a bad bet. I didn't realize I didn't realize you had that much money.
At number 1, let's go way back to 2005, when this was high-definition TV, to the second ever Monte Carlo Millions. Phil Ivey had dominated the event the prior year, only to lose at the final table.
I felt like I should have won the tournament last year.
This year, the prize pool had been up to $1 million for first place. Now, heads up at the final table, Phil Ivey wasn't going to let the crown slip away from him twice. Across from him, Paul Jackson sits short-stacked to Ivey's mountain of chips. Looking down at 6-5 offsuit, Jackson tries to see a cheap flop. Ivey, with Queen 8 of hearts, uses his chip advantage, charging Jackson 60,000 chips to continue. Jackson calls. The flop comes Jack, Jack 7 with 2 clubs. Phil Ivey still thinks he's ahead with some backdoor equity and leads out for 80,000 chips.
80,000 is the bet.
A fairly standard play with his chip advantage, but this is where things start to get crazy. Paul Jackson doesn't want to be pushed around and raises the bet to 170,000.
I've got Queen High, but I'll take a stab at it. And look at this! Re-raised by Jackson.
Wow.
Jackson made it to the final table, and it wasn't by letting people run him over. Something isn't adding up to Phil. It's unlikely that a jack would raise him here. He's not buying the bluff and re-raises to 320,000 chips. The pot now at 666,000 chips, and both players have effectively nothing. You were promised some crazy action, and here it is. Paul Jackson, with an unexpected play, raises Phil Ivey again. Now the bet is up to 470,000 chips with almost 1 million chips in the pot. At this point, analysis is out the window. The pressure of the final table, playing heads up for $1 million. No one knows what's going through these players' minds right now. Phil Ivey sits, calculating. Phil Ivey ends up staring down Paul Jackson here for over 7 minutes until he picks up on something.
Everything Paul Jackson has done.
All in.
What?
That's why we're here and they're there.
Paul Jackson put up a good fight. He landed some punches, but eventually throws in the towel. Paul Jackson would later shove Queen Jack suited into Phil Ivey's King Queen, and Ivey would go on to take the crown.
He said it was a good laydown, and he's going to do just that. And Phil Ivey is the guy who did not blink.
What was your favorite Phil Ivey bluff? Do you have one we missed? Comment below and subscribe to see more legendary poker moments.